千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. As always, I want to extend my welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we are ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. Let's get started with Tao Te Ching, Chapter 3. The chapter title for Chapter 3 is Pacify the People. 安民章. Those are the three characters that you see there. The first character means peace or safe or safety. The second character, the one in the middle, that means people. In the context of this chapter, the people are the subjects of a kingdom. In the context of our lives, the people are everyone in your life, including yourself. And then, of course, the last character, the one on the right, that is just a character for chapter. This chapter is a continuation of the Wu Wei concept discussed in the previous chapter. In Tao Te Ching chapter 2, Lao Tzu said the wise ruler would use Wu Wei in governance to set an example in teaching without words. And that example will be for the people, the subjects of the kingdom, to follow. In this chapter, Lao Tzu expands on this idea and provides specifics about bringing peace and calmness to the people, reducing chaos and contention among them, and provide practical benefits in terms of livelihood and the quality of life in general. Now, a few words about translational issues. The word pacify is the closest that I can find to the first character that you see there, an. Now, as native speakers of a language, you become sensitive to shades of meaning and nuance of the language. So the term pacify is not a perfect match for an. When we say pacify, especially pacifying a group of people, that can carry a negative connotation. For instance, the people are garrulous, they are contentious. Perhaps in national politics, a group of people is in a state of unrest, perhaps even an uprising. So when you say pacify a particular region, you're talking about suppression of that. So that particular context is completely missing in this character here. And as I mentioned, it means safety, it means peace. What we're really saying here is bringing peace to the people or guiding the people toward peace. That's a different thing than putting down an incipient rebellion. So, language translation sometimes is not perfect. That is why I'm very grateful to have this opportunity that as I talk about particular translations, I can sometimes show you the process of getting from one to the other, and I can provide additional context to make sure that you really understand the meaning of the original ancient Chinese. Now, let's move on to the chapter itself. Dao De Jing, chapter 3. Here is what Lao Tzu says for the third verse of the Dao De Jing. Do not glorify the achievers, so the people will not squabble. Do not treasure goods that are hard to obtain, so the people will not become thieves. Do not show the desired things, so their hearts will not be confused. Thus, the governance of the sage empties their hearts, fills their bellies, weakens their ambitions, strengthens their bones. Let the people have no cunning and no greed, so those who scheme will not dare to meddle. Act without contrivance, and nothing will be beyond control. So that is the text of Dao De Jing chapter 3. Let us proceed to divide up the sections to show the hidden structure of this particular chapter. Here's how the 3 sections look. Now let's talk about how we arrive at these particular divisions. Focusing first on section 1, the top section, the beginning parts. As we scan through the first 6 lines, I think it should be obvious that you can detect a pattern. It goes like A, B, A, B, A, B. Now the length of the lines vary, but you can zoom in on the repeating pattern by looking at the first character. If you were to, for instance, zoom in on line 3, line 5, as well as line 1 at the beginning, 1, 3, and 5 have the first character in common, as you can see there. They're all translated the same way. Do not. Don't do something. Then, as you look at lines 2, 4, and 6, you notice a similar pattern as 1, 3, and 5. The first character is the same. Indeed, the second character is also the same. So let's highlight them. And you can see the translation on the right-hand side. So the people. Now, you would also note that in line 6, it is translated in a slightly different way. This is actually to correspond with the variation that appears in the original text for line 6. There are versions of line 6, particularly the He Shang Gong version, where the second character is missing, is not there. Other versions, Wang Bi, for instance, includes that for a better poetic matching with the previous lines. So in recognition of that, the translation varies a little bit too. Now, let's move on to section 2 and look for the repeating characters there. Now that it's been sectioned off like this, I think it should be relatively easy to spot the repetition. The second character in line 8, 9, 10, and 11, it is the same character. Translated the same way, there. As you can see, we can do this with my translation because, as you can see, I stick very closely to the original. I wish to convey the original meaning as closely, as accurately as possible. As I remarked before, this is usually not the case with typical translations. Sometimes things are skipped, sometimes things are added, but we don't want to do that. Let's take a look at the last section, the third section, the concluding section. What are some repeating characters? Well, unlike sections 1 and 2, there aren't the same poetic constructions that we note in the concluding section. The lines are all different lengths, and we can spot the last two lines. The second character is the same. So the best we can do will be to single out that character, wu. It is the wu in wu wei, and it's repeated multiple times, 4 times to be precise, in the last section. You can see that it's translated differently as no, without, and nothing. And that's because the character itself is a negative character that stands for all of those connotations. Chinese is contextual, so the meaning and the translation can shift. As long as one does not vary from the original meaning, that's still a okay, acceptable, good translation. So now we can see that the chapter is divided into 3 sections. We can also see at a high level that the first section is about a whole bunch of do nots. They appear to be what Lao Tzu is advising the king, the emperor, or the ruler. Here's what not to do toward the people, the subjects of the kingdom, the citizens of the empire, etc. Then in the second section, it appears to be Lao Tzu still continuing to advise the ruler in talking about the ideal, the governance of the sage. That is, how things ought to be. What is the best way to rule to the benefit of everyone in the kingdom or empire? Then the concluding part is basically to summarize all of the above. And the last line, the last 2 lines are especially significant. It is emphasizing the power, the effectiveness, the optimal versatility of the Wu Wei concept. So we're going to delve into all of those in great detail. And we will start with the first line of the first section. The first line says, do not glorify the achievers. Let's take a look at the literal breakdown of the character meaning. The first character, that's the bu character, very common to denote a negative context. Do not, is not, am not, etc. Not. And then the second character means to glorify, to set aside for glorification. And then the last character translated in various ways. Here it means achievers. This is normally a positive context. Someone who has done good. Someone who has done something that is admirable. So why not glorify them? Why not set them aside for special recognition? Why would that be a bad thing? Conventionally, we think of glorification as positive. And the question has to be asked, why is Lao Tzu advocating against the encouragement of greater achievement? So here's the basic concept. Lao Tzu is pointing out that excessive praise can be divisive and negative. In other words, when you go overboard in highlighting certain people for praise, you begin to separate and divide people. Those who are praised too much may become arrogant. And let me be the first to note that this is something that I had done in my life. I know that before, in my personal past, from time to time, I had a tendency to praise people too much. And I subsequently could see the negative impact. I could see them becoming arrogant as a result of my excessive praise. What I needed to do was to throttle back, was to refrain from doing it excessively. But at the time, I did not fully understand this particular Tao, so I made that mistake. It is the mistake that Lao Tzu is warning the ruler against. Conversely, those who are not praised may be afflicted with envy and jealousy. And that's what I mean by how one can begin to separate and divide people. Now, it is also a point to be made when we say, well, we all know when praise is undeserved. That is, when certain people are praised or promoted out of the natural order that everyone can perceive, there is a feeling of discomfort. It is perceived as perhaps nepotism. For instance, when a family member in a business is promoted over and beyond those who are better qualified or possess seniority, people know, well, it's a family business, so this is something that's done all the time, but there's still a feeling of discomfort. Why? Because it is out of the natural order that people perceive. People still feel that those who are more worthy should be promoted over those who are less worthy. Because of that, Tao cultivators are careful. They can still provide encouragement. They can still praise. But their emphasis is that their praise must be factually based. The praise must be based on something that everyone can recognize. That's what keeps it from excessive praise. When you praise someone too much, it really becomes flattery. It is no longer sincere praise or deserved praise. It becomes something that turns into a negative thing. That negative thing leads to contention. And that's the next point. Line 2 says, so the people will not squabble. Squabble is indicating contention. Sometimes it's out in the open. Other times it can be covert. So let me talk about this character, Zheng. This character has the following definition. As a verb, it means to compete. As a noun, it is competition or contention. And of course, as a verb, it can also mean to contend against. So then when we plug it into the line, so the people will not squabble. It's basically Lao Tzu pointing out that when you have unhealthy competition going on, people chasing after the same excessive praise, the same flattering remarks to feed the ego, it can become rather toxic. A competitive environment that is unhealthy and toxic leads to all kinds of negative consequences. People become overly aggressive. They can even be harmful to one another. This point is well known to the ancient sages. They too were able to observe the same contentious behavior among people. Back in their days, human nature was much the same as what we observe around all of us today. Therefore, Zhuangzi, the storytelling sage who came after Lao Tzu, made a similar point, except that the way he made the point, as usual, was with a story. In this case, a very short story that I would like to now share with you. Once upon a time, in ancient China, there was a man who worked as one of the guards at the city gates. One day, his elderly father passed away. He cried in grieving his father's passing. He refused to eat anything out of grief, and soon he became emaciated. He lost a lot of weight. The king heard about this and thought the man demonstrated great filial piety. He wished to promote filial piety, so he decided to show his approval of this man by rewarding the virtue. He promoted the guard to the rank of a high official, well above his peers. News of this spread among the people. The man's neighbors were surprised by this sudden rise in position. They all became rather envious. From that point on, when someone passed away, family members would put on a display of overwhelming grief. They would weep for all to see. They would starve themselves for days on end. Indeed, quite a few of them were so intent on doing this that they actually died of starvation. The end. What can we take away from this story? Well, Zhuangzi told this in being intentionally dramatic because his purpose was to make the point against contrivance. In the Tao, the opposite of Wu Wei is contrived actions. Being contrived distorts our true nature. The Tao is about returning to our natural selves, our true nature. So this is basically saying that, listen, there is nothing intrinsically wrong with us pursuing various goals in life. That is what people do. People can perhaps pursue profits. Some people pursue prominence. In such pursuits, Tao cultivators apply the Tao and let their actions and words flow naturally. People who do not understand the Tao, well, do as the mourners do, put on a show intended to let everybody know just how virtuous they are. And by that very act, demonstrate that they don't understand virtues at all. And second point, Zhuangzi noted excessive reward, such as given by the king in promoting the guard. Excessive rewards given to anyone, singled out for any reason, creates an incentive for everyone else. Suddenly, there is a goal for people to pursue. The incentive leads to contention and toxic competition among people. People trying to outdo one another. Like, oh, you think that was a display of grief? I'll show you real grief. I will outdo you. I will grieve even more. So as the situation escalates quickly, as we have seen in the story, becomes negative quickly, and people harm themselves and each other in the process. And that is why Lao Tzu wrote, do not glorify the achievers, so the people will not squabble. You can see the correspondence between Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi, expressed in two different ways, but really making a very similar point. So let's dig a little deeper in the whole idea of glorification. There are extremes here. Glorification in being excessive or non-glorification. This is something that is definitely observed in the world. In different parts of the world, there are education systems that run along different philosophies. In a very strict, excessively strict educational system, everyone is graded and ranked. Every student has a number 1 in the class, number 2 in the class, number 3 in the class, and of course, last place in the class. Every school is ranked, and therefore, this results in tremendous pressure on everyone involved, students, teachers, principals, etc. The students in particular focus on study skills, memorization, but not on social skills, street smarts. There is a lot of stress that results from this as the students focus on rote memorization rather than critical thinking skills or problem solving. So that does not produce the best possible students. There is also squabbling. There's contentious behavior from the students as they compete against one another. Now, what about non-glorification? What about the other extreme? We swing from the overly strict educational system to the overly permissive system. In such a system, there's participation trophies for all. There's no ranking. Students get trophies just for showing up because everyone is a winner. The unfortunate side effect, because this is an extreme, it's got negative associations with it. There's no learning of values in the sense that students may miss out on lessons like the value of hard work. There's no earning of merits. There's no sense of deserving a particular reward because you have worked hard to earn that reward. They, therefore, may be poorly prepared for the real world. I think we can see that both extremes lead to negative results. What might be a point of moderation or balance between the two? The Tao is all about that equilibrium that benefits all, the balance. So here are some suggestions. We can start from the premise that we can't really do without competition. Competition is natural. It is found all over nature. In evolution, living things compete to survive, to gain access to resources. The Tao is about nature. Competition always been part of it. Since ancient times, we have always made that observation. Yes, the animals are competing against one another for sustenance and survival. What about human beings? We human beings also compete since the beginning. And we compete not just for the basics of life, not just for survival, not just for sustenance. We also compete for beliefs, ideals, honor, love, and more. Many of our dramas feature the love triangle. That is a competition. There's nothing unnatural about competition. Wherever we find life, we also find it. So in a competitive environment, how can it become a healthy competition versus toxic? Point one, instead of glorification, we should perhaps consider recognition as something of value. Glorification in this context would be excessive praise. Recognition in this context would be recognizing someone based on the facts of their achievement. Well deserved. Then rewards. Just like the story from Zhuangzi, if we set the rewards to be a material thing, people are naturally incentivized to compete for that, with possible negative results. But if it is a Tao-centric reward, it can be something intangible. The recognition itself is intangible. It could be the feeling of satisfaction and fulfillment at having achieved or reached a milestone. It can be encouragement to proceed further down the same path. So the Tao-centric rewards may not necessarily be material in nature, but it can be all the more encouraging or motivating. And that's the bottom point here. The third point is that the motivation itself can be Tao-centric. It isn't necessarily to be wealthy and or famous. It can be to better oneself, to perfect and refine oneself. So those will be distinctly different than what many people pursue and the reason for their pursuit. For Tao cultivators, it can look similar, and yet underneath the surface, the essence can be completely different. It can be Tao-centric rather than centered upon the material world. Let's continue on. Line 3. Line 3 says, do not treasure goods that are hard to obtain. Let's break down the characters. We've got 6 characters here. The first one is the hopefully now familiar character. 不 means no or not. Second character there is value. Typically, when used as an adjective, it means like a high value. Third character there, hard or difficult. Fourth character, obtain, to get. And then we have a character there that is the apostrophe S. So not corresponding to a word in English except the word of in a reverse sequence. If we say it in the normal sequence, it would be the apostrophe S. And then the last character there, goods or merchandise. So the goods or merchandise refers to material objects, precious objects that are set aside as great value. The treasures, gold, silver, diamonds, gems, and so on. So we already know, just from experience and also observing history, that when we value such goods, we give rise to greed. And this is no different in ancient times. So I think Lao Tzu here is pointing out something that's fairly obvious, that whenever you set aside material objects as being highly valuable, greed enters the picture. And that greed, it quickly becomes the motivating factor for so many people. So at this point, I want to just kind of make sure everyone sees that this is a different point from the previous two lines. When we talked about glorify achievers, it's all about fame. When we talk about treasuring goods, it's about money. Of course, we know at the same time that when you have different values attached to different objects, that is economy. When you have objects that are hard to obtain, commanding a higher price, that is basically supply and demand basis of capitalistic economy. So intrinsically, there's nothing wrong with it, but we must also recognize that it is similar to the glorification scenario in that it can lead to people going into contention. They squabble against one another. And what's even more, it can lead to the undesirable behavior of people taking those things away from one another by hook or crook. So let me single out the last character there. That character is Dao. Yes, it is the exact same sound as the character for the Dao, which is, as you can see, is in the upper right-hand corner. So that character looks very differently from this character, but they sound exactly the same, Dao. And there are many such cases in the Chinese language where characters that mean completely different things and look completely different have the exact same sound. So Dao, in this case, if you look at the last word in the English translation, you see that it's translated as thieves. The definition of this character is to steal, to rob. As a noun, it's a thief, a robber. So it's more than just thieves. I just want everybody to know the original context. So let's take a look at the entire line altogether. As I mentioned, greed tempts people to take things from others by hook or by crook. By stealth, it will be theft. By force, that will be robbery. Sometimes it's a combination of the two, whatever gets the job done. So this is now pointing to the negative consequence of material desires. Chasing after material things, money, precious objects, whether it's a work of art, precious metal, precious gemstones, anything like that, lead people into all kinds of negative consequences. In the Tao masters will always make it a point to emphasize that what the great majority, the vast majority of the people pursue the monetary gains are in fact illusory from a spiritual perspective. And Tao masters want to convey that, usually with a series of examples, to talk about the limitation of money. It's like when we say money can't buy you happiness. So there's a lot of truth in that. Money can buy you things that bring you temporary happiness. But the happiness doesn't last because the things themselves don't last. So one particular Tao master, one of my teachers, will talk about what money can buy and what money can not necessarily buy. And this master, for instance, might point out that money can buy a luxurious bed. But then money cannot necessarily buy a good night's sleep. I think the meaning is pretty clear. Suppose you have this expensive king-size bed. It's got expensive bed sheets with extremely high thread counts, like 1800. But due to anxiety, you toss and turn all night, and you get up tired the next day. Then the most luxurious bed has done you no good. You can have a very plain, inexpensive bed, but then sleep soundly. That is actually of greater value to the individual. So all of the other examples are in a similar vein. A grand feast. Money cannot necessarily buy you healthy appetites. Same idea. Suppose you can easily afford to hire gourmet chefs to craft the most amazing cuisine, the most amazing meals, but then due to poor health, or perhaps because of illness, you have no appetite for any of it. And I think this is something that we may have experienced at one time or another. Remember when you were down with the flu, you felt awful and had no appetite whatsoever. What if that is not like a flu that can come and go, but a more lasting condition? Then that is misery. On the other hand, if you have fairly simple food, but you have a great appetite, even the simple foods are absolutely delicious. So let's continue on to the other examples provided by Tao sages and masters. Money can buy a huge mansion, but money may not necessarily buy home sweet home. Your humble abode can be that home sweet home, and if it is, it's way better than a huge mansion that isn't. A place that perhaps is big but feels empty, lacking warmth. Money can buy you many books. It can perhaps even buy you time to read those books. But money will not necessarily buy true wisdom. What you read from books is book knowledge. Book knowledge will not turn into wisdom unless you actually apply them to life. So money won't buy you that. You have to actually put it to work. You have to actually live the knowledge. Money can buy you cosmetics, fashion, that supposedly make you look good. But money may not necessarily buy true beauty. This is something that we spoke of in the previous chapter when we talked about physical beauty versus spiritual beauty. Physical beauty, we talked about how it can fade in time. But inner beauty, spiritual beauty, is something that you can refine over time. And there again, what is required is the work that you put into refining yourself, not something that you can pay money to get. And these examples go on and on. Money can buy you a high-level position. It is done in our society all the time. But the high-level position won't necessarily win you the respect, the genuine respect of people. That's just the way it is, and we've seen plenty of examples of that as well. Someone who occupies a high-level position with whatever means that he or she was able to gain that position, but then not deserving of anyone's respect. That person can be surrounded by sycophants, yes men, but no real people that admire and respect them out of the truth in their hearts. And speaking of which, money can also buy social connection that's different from a high-level position. Money can gain you access into certain social circles. By spending money, you can perhaps connect with people in that social circle. But money won't necessarily buy you real friendship. Real friendship, we know, is something that we need to work on. That it doesn't just come by itself. You need to approach it with sincerity. You need to give of yourself in order to forge the bonds of friendship. These two lists provided by Tao masters make it clear that while money can buy many things, there are also many other things that money cannot necessarily buy. We are now on to line 5. Do not show the desired things. First, let's break down these characters. The literal meaning of the 4 characters are, the first character means no or not. The second character means show. Now, this is a character that is used in the ancient context, and I will show you the difference between that context and the modern usage. Third character means can or able to, and then last character means desire, and that can be both a verb and a noun. So let me focus for the moment on the second character. In the Mandarin, this character is pronounced jian. It means to see. Now, in the ancient usage, it's the same character with different pronunciation. Xian. It means to show or to be seen. It's a related context than to see. And this way of utilizing this particular character is almost never done in modern Mandarin, which makes it all the more crucial that someone attempting to translate the original must understand not just modern language, but also the ancient Chinese that existed before linguistic evolution has changed quite a few things. So in this context, it isn't to see the desired things, it is to let the desired things be shown or to be seen. Desired things are not necessarily the goods that are rare or hard to find, hard to obtain. That was the previous section. When we talk about desired things, it's a superset of the things that are material objects. Or let me say it the other way. Of all the things that one can desire, A subset of those things are material things like jewelry. There are also things that are intangible, that are desirable as well. Desired things may be, for instance, a particular skill or ability. Those are not tangible. Desired things may be something like beauty. That's not necessarily tangible, but perhaps is a quality. Also, desired things may not necessarily be hard to find, even when we're talking about material things. For instance, today, if someone is a big fan of sports cars and wants to buy something that's rather expensive, like $1 million sports car, with the funds available, those high-end sports cars are readily available as well. They would not be hard to find, but they're not necessarily affordable either because they require a big pile of cash to purchase. So they are desired, but they are not difficult to obtain. When you have enough assets, you are able to make that purchase. So I'm just making the point that we're talking about a wider scope of all the things that one could desire. So as a general statement, the negativity that desires can cause in individuals is even of a wider scope too. And that's line 6. Line 6 says, so their hearts will not be confused. That is the hearts of the people. Let us also break that down into its components. We've got 5 characters here. The first character means let, and the second character, people. As I mentioned, we're talking about the subjects of a kingdom, citizens of an empire, the people. The middle character is heart, and as I will show in a moment, it can also be interpreted as the mind. Then we have the character once again for no or not, 不. Then the last character means chaos, chaotic, or confused. So as I noted, in this case, heart can also be rendered as mind. This is common, especially in translating texts from Asian spirituality traditions. So the bottom line, what Laozi is trying to say here is that desired things will tend to confuse one's mind or one's heart. Exposure to them become distractions and temptations. And this is the reason why Tao cultivators actively manage their sensory input. They want to be the master of what they take into their world. Consider how people tend to put themselves in a position to be distracted and tempted by desirable things all the time. You can easily see someone perhaps habitually goes out shopping even when there isn't anything that they need to get. As they walk through the sights and sounds of the shopping mall, they are immersed in a world where there are many things that they can see, and therefore things that can become the desirable objects that they will perhaps then become obsessed with. Noting this, Tao cultivators master greater control of themselves, so they will be mindful when they go on the same shopping excursion so that they would not be so easily distracted or tempted. They know what they want versus what they need, and they moderate their desires to keep it under control and not let themselves be controlled by their desires. So in all of this, there's the admonition from Tao masters to be careful of that which you desire too much. And this is a constant practice because things show up all the time. They present themselves in front of us. And if something latches onto our attention, you begin to fixate on it and you forget what else is happening around you. So this too is a familiar concept in the Tao. And here as well, Zhuangzi has made the same point, but again, using a story format instead of the statement format used by Laozi. This is one of the more famous stories from Zhuangzi. It is called The Mantis Hunts the Cicada. And the story goes like this. I want to present a quick paraphrase version of it. And the reason is because it is also available for everyone in book form. I'll talk about that momentarily. Here's the story about the mantis hunts the cicada. One day, Zhuangzi was walking through the woods. He wandered near an orchard. He was enjoying the day. He was admiring the scenery when he heard a sound from above in the sky. Zhuangzi looked up and he saw a strange bird. That bird was flying toward him. The bird seemed strange because Zhuangzi had never seen a bird quite like it before. It had a very wide wingspan. It had huge eyes. He was trying to figure out what to make of it when it dipped low and brushed his head as it flew past, much to his surprise and a bit of annoyance. So he thought to himself, what kind of bird is this? Such large wings, but cannot keep itself high up in the sky. Such big eyes, but it didn't seem to see me and therefore bumped against me. So Zhuangzi decided to go after this strange bird. He took out his slingshot and he followed this bird, and he saw that the bird landed on a chestnut tree, so he approached silently. His intention was to hunt it down, was to take it down with his slingshot. So Zhuangzi got closer and closer. He saw an interesting scene unfolding before him. There was cicada chirping away in the tree, blissfully unaware of a mantis sneaking up behind it, ready to pounce. The mantis itself, focused on getting the cicada, was unaware that the strange bird that just landed was close to it and was getting ready to snap it up with its huge beak. So Zhuangzi saw the irony in this situation because the bird was not aware of Zhuangzi approaching, just like the mantis was not aware of the bird right behind it, and the cicada was not aware of the mantis ready to pounce on it. What a pattern. It seemed like a chain of being oblivious from one to the next. So Zhuangzi thought, clearly, this is a pattern of the Tao in life. All living things are looking to gain some sort of advantage. But then in the process of that, this action imposes a limitation. Generally speaking, the potentially gain right in front of you causes you to forget the potential disaster right behind you. These are all connected. So Zhuangzi got ready with a slingshot. He had the bird targeted. He was congratulating himself for his new insights about this pattern. Then he was startled with a voice behind him. Hey, you, what are you doing in my orchard? Zhuangzi jumped. It was the gardener in charge of the orchard. In going after the bird, Zhuangzi did not even realize that he was trespassing into private property. He probably went past the sign without noticing. He was so preoccupied, he did not even hear the gardener coming up behind him. So, in sheer surprise and panic, he dropped his slingshot and made a hasty exit out of the orchard. The gardener, still thinking that he was there to steal something like the chestnuts, continued yelling after him very angrily. So this experience had a profound effect on Zhuangzi. It lasted for days. One of his students noticed that he seemed depressed and asked, Master, you look rather unhappy today. Is something wrong? So Zhuangzi told the students about the story from his experience, and Zhuangzi sighed. He said, I was so fixated on external appearance, I completely lost sight of the essence. Laozi, my teacher, always said that no matter what place you go to or visit, you should be mindful of the rules of that environment. I forgot all about that when I went into the orchard. The student thought about this and said, but master, that seems like a minor mistake anyone can make. Zhuangzi said, well, the issue goes a lot deeper than that. The cicada, mantis, and bird were all unaware of the danger lurking behind them. This right there was a great lesson for me, but I did not learn that lesson well enough. I too was unaware of the gardener right behind me. This is why I am unhappy with myself, because I can see I still have a long way to go in cultivating the Tao. The end. So what can we take away from this story by Zhuangzi? There are some major points here. First, let us note that excessive desires can cause tunnel vision. That is, we can only see what is right in front of us. We see not what's around us, what's behind us. This means we must cultivate situational awareness, sort of a panoramic vision, the ability to be perceptive in all directions and to constantly keep everything around us into consideration. So this is the attention that we need to cultivate in the external environment. What about internally? What does Zhuangzi say about that? Well, Zhuangzi is pointing out it is possible for us to be so attracted, so overwhelmed by distractions. This is nowhere more true than in the material world. So the story isn't really about the cicada, or the mantis, or the strange bird, or Zhuangzi, or the gardener. It's about what we get distracted by in the world. This is the reason why Zhuangzi is basically saying we need to learn the lesson better, just as he should have learned the lesson better. To cultivate internal composure, to be able to maintain clarity in the midst of chaos. And in the material world, when are we not right in the middle of chaos? It is rare that we have moments of peace and tranquility in the material world, which is why it is all the more important for us to have that internal composure so we can call upon peace and tranquility anytime that we need it, no matter what is happening around us. Lastly, yet another major point that Zhuangzi is making is about all of us, one another. There is a way for us to help one another because there is a reason why we're all in this world together. We can help other people see what they cannot see for themselves. Conversely, other people can help us see what we cannot see for ourselves. This is like the saying goes, no matter how great your vision, you can never see the back of your own head. Quite true, at least not without the help of mirrors. So this is a great reason for us to travel together in this journey, for us to study together. You can inform me of things I cannot see and vice versa. This story comes from my book, The Tao of Happiness. In part 2, Travel Advisories, you will find this story from Zhuangzi. And the story is the reason why Lao Tzu wrote his lines, do not show the desired things so their hearts will not be confused. I think Zhuangzi himself would admit that when he was fixating on the strange bird, his heart was not at its most clear. His perception was not at the utmost clarity, and that's why he himself was no different than the bird or the mantis or the cicada. Now, we're in a position to summarize what we have learned so far with this table here. It is always important in the Tao for us to map the lessons from the advice to the ancient rulers to advice to ourselves in modern times. That is why you see the 2 rows there. The top line is in the context of the ancient wisdom and in the context of the wise advisor telling the king what to do, what not to do. The bottom row is us living our modern lives where you are literally the king of your own destiny and you have Lao Tzu advising you on what to do and what not to do. So let's review. In the column for fame, which is glorifying the achievers, as a review, Lao Tzu said, do not glorify the achievers so the people will not squabble. Now we understand what that means. How do we apply that to ourselves? Do not play favorites. That's actually the equivalent of glorifying certain people, singling them out for special treatment. That's playing favorites. Do not play favorites or discriminate against anyone. Treat everyone at every level of society with the same respect and courtesy. To discriminate against someone is the flip side of playing favorites. It's the yin and yang, and we want to be mindful of both. And we know that those who are able to treat everyone at every level of society with the same respect and courtesy, those are the good and kind people that we come across. And hopefully we become a good and kind person as well. There's been, it's oftentimes been said that you can assess someone's character simply by observing how they treat those who serve them. In a restaurant setting, observe how someone treats the waiter, and you can then tell, to some extent, how that person really is. What about the boss, who treats everyone at every level of the company as an equal? That is the boss who wins everyone's trust and respect. So the Tao really does work. It isn't practiced by everyone, but those who know how to apply it, those are the ones who will win over other people. Now, let's take a look at the next column over for greed. This is the one where Lao Tzu says, do not treasure goods that are hard to obtain, so people will not become thieves. This is addressing material things, material objects. So when we map it to our modern existence, here is what we find. It is basically saying that we want to disengage from the material perspective. We want to value people above objects, and we want to value relationships above transactions. And I think when I say it like that, we can clearly see the truth in these words. What can be so valuable about material things that we place them above people? It seems ludicrous. And yet, you and I have seen people do that quite often. It doesn't matter what other people do, though. It's more important for us to pay attention to what we do. And then Lao Tzu also advised the king, do not show the desired things, so their hearts will not be confused. When I lay it side by side like this, you can compare this column with the column to its left, and you can see right here that the desired things is a bigger, wider scope than just the goods that are hard to obtain, because there are plenty of desired things beyond just the goods that are hard to obtain. Some of them, as I mentioned, are qualities, are intangibles. Others are goods that are easy to obtain, but command a very high price. Either way, Lao Tzu is basically saying that any of those desired things, not just precious jewelry and the like, any of those will confuse the hearts and minds of people. They do the same for us. If we allow them to, they can also confuse our hearts and minds. Therefore, when we map it to our world, this is about managing the desires in our lives. We don't want to subject ourselves to unnecessary distractions and temptations. This is why I say Tao cultivators are very mindful of their sensory input. They don't need to follow the dictates of society. They pick and choose what they will expose themselves to. They do so mindfully, so they know what to expect, and they know how to handle the seductive temptations and distractions that come their way. So we should follow that example. Finally, I want to present this graphic at the very bottom here. It shows a ripple in a pond of water that was originally still. When the water was still, it was clear and reflected its surroundings accurately, precisely, clearly. This is a metaphor for the mind. What it says is that the mind has a preference for tranquility, a natural preference. That is the original state of the mind. Desires, which covers all of the above, desire for fame, desire for material things, desire for other desired things that are not objects, all of these are like pebbles cast into the pond. Whenever you have a pebble that's being dropped into this peaceful tranquility, still water, the water is no longer tranquil. The ripple forms on the surface and it spreads out, distorting the reflection. The reflection that was once clear becomes distorted. And the only way to address that is to limit the pebbles that you drop into it so that you can pick and choose carefully how and when you disturb the stillness of your mind. It is only when you really are doing it for a particular reason that you allow the ripple to occur. That is what I mean by managing sensory input. We are now nearing the top of the hour, so what I would like to do is to jump to the summary for our discussion today. Now, we've only made it partway through the chapter, so I think you can see that there's plenty more for us to talk about. We'll save that for next time. For now, let's talk about what we have learned today together. We can also do a preview for the things that we haven't covered yet. But first, let's talk about what we discussed. First, we talked about this idea of not glorifying the achievers, and we're able to expand on that to talk about the way we interact with people around us. The recognition here is everybody, no matter who they are, everybody has a fundamental connection with the Tao. Everyone has this intrinsic worth. The way that the sixth patriarch expressed it was that he said, as a Zen Buddhist, he stated that everyone had Buddha nature, and that Buddha nature was one and the same regardless of who you happen to be. From the greatest saint in history to the most heinous criminal, everyone has Buddha nature. In that respect, in that fundamental connection with the Tao, there's an equality for all. No one is greater or lesser in connecting with the Tao, which is why I say, expanding from the lesson of no glorification of achievers, that we should live in this world without the illusory concept of separation, favoritism, and of course, discrimination. Number two, there's no need to obsess over material things. And the notation here is that the material things, no matter what they are, they serve us. We do not serve them. Simple when we talk about it that way. More difficult in practice as we seek to apply it to the real world. We probably, at one time or another, we all have things that we obsessed over. I know I did. And when I obsessed over that thing, then indeed it was true, I was serving the greed. I was serving the desire. I was controlled by it. I did not control it. So I don't want that to be the case ever again. This realization is going to help remind me that I want to gain the upper hand. Number 3, the last point we talked about today is that there is no need to let yourself be distracted or tempted. This is out of the recognition that the world is full of inviting sights and sounds. And that makes it necessary for us to take them in using the principle of moderation. Never too much or too little. We want to know what's going on in the world, but we don't want to be overwhelmed. This is what's going to help us remain tranquil and unmoved when other people are all jumping on a bandwagon, getting into a fad, and becoming lost in the process. Now, a quick preview for what we will talk about next time. We're going to be covering important concepts from Lao Tzu, specifically when he gets very specific about the wise way to live your life. He framed it the same way as the first part, as an advice to the king. We benefit from that in the same way by mapping it to our existence. So what Lao Tzu will talk about, what we will discuss, includes, number 1, humility. We want to always practice the virtue of humility, and next time we'll talk about the reasons why. Number 2, we always want to take care of practical needs. The Tao is not about the ethereal. It is about the down-to-earth, everyday realities of the world. We need to live, we need to survive, we need to thrive. Nothing against thriving at all. There is a way to gain prosperity and abundance for ourselves and our loved ones. We just do it in accordance with the Tao. So more details on that next time. Number 3, we should reduce unrealistic ambitions. These are what we call blind ambitions that lead us to ruin. So how do we watch for that? How do we reduce that kind of ambition in ourselves? Number 4, strengthening inner resolve and character. This is where we use the metaphor of strengthening the bones. So we'll talk about that more as well, but basically we need to have a sound structure in order to build a spiritual life around that. So again, a very practical way to approach life, and that's what the Tao is, a practical guideline for us in living the art of life. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.